Hello, everyone. I thought I would talk to you today about how to read Shakespeare. Of course, this is a complete volume of Shakespeare's work that I got at Barnes and Noble for $25. It's a quite nice edition. It doesn't have any kind of annotations or academic explanation. It's just the plays. Now, I have read around half of Shakespeare's plays at this point, and of course, I'm going to be talking mainly about the plays today, not the sonnets, even though I have read all of the sonnets. And I've also seen some, film productions of Shakespeare. I haven't seen a play, like a live play. I mean, I've seen like recorded plays, but not like a live play. I would like to someday though. But anyway, this is primarily going to be about reading Shakespeare, not seeing, watching Shakespeare. I might make a video about that some other time. But a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions when it comes to Shakespeare, or at the very least, they have a lot of expectations that they shouldn't have when trying to read Shakespeare. Um, so, for example, in order to read Shakespeare, you have to have intellectual humility, which means that you can't expect to understand everything, at least especially the first time while you're reading Shakespeare. And some people, they can't handle the fact that they're not going to understand everything, but it's perfectly normal. It doesn't mean that you're stupid. But Shakespeare, after all, was writing in the late 1500s, early 1600s. The language was, in some ways, quite different then. And so it is archaic in some ways. And I'm sure that if Shakespeare were brought back to life today, he would have some trouble understanding us, although I think we could communicate still fairly well. And so you have to have intellectual humility in that you're not going to understand everything, but that doesn't mean you still can't enjoy Shakespeare. And I think that and of course, Shakespeare is not even the hardest writer that I've read. I've found some romantic poets from the early 19th century to be more difficult in terms of trying to understand what they're meaning. So Shakespeare is actually, when it comes to writers from hundreds of years ago, is actually one of the easier writers to understand, especially when it comes to poetic verse. So anyway, so while reading Shakespeare, though, you must remember that don't just try to get through the plot and so you can understand the plot. Of course, I tried to do that when I first started reading it because Shakespeare isn't just writing because of plot. He is trying to explore the beauty of the English language. He was really, in many ways, more interested in that than he was the plot, because in many cases Shakespeare stole the plot or used legends or stories from earlier time periods. He didn't come. He wasn't very original when it came to plot, but he was original in his language. That's primarily what he was interested in, and so you have to slow down and appreciate, a sentence for its beauty or for its metaphorical complexity, or a paragraph for its beauty or metaphorical complexity. And that's why reading Shakespeare can actually be more beneficial, because sometimes if you're watching a Shakespeare play, that an actor may say something so quickly that you don't have time to actually appreciate the line, because it goes by you, and now the actor's talking about something else, where you can actually stop and appreciate every line in Shakespeare. And and of course, because Shakespeare again wrote, in order again to explore the vast beauty of the English language, not just and he wasn't a utilitarian in the sense that he only wrote in order to move the story along. He was very much concerned with the English language. So, for example, when Romeo was speaking to Juliet, he could just as easily have said, "Juliet, I love you," and then the story could have moved along. But no, he says, "And Juliet is the sun." He loves Juliet just as he loves, the light of morning, on his face, and that creates a far more profound emotion and powerful image, and it resonates with you in a way that it wouldn't if he had just said, "Juliet, I love you." And so you must try to appreciate Shakespeare's language. And now another thing you must know in order to appreciate Shakespeare is the fact that he was writing and talking about the time periods that that he himself existed in. So for example, when Shakespeare writes Macbeth, that he's writing about the gunpowder plot of 1605. You know, the fact that of course in 1605 the English, the King James's government was nearly overthrown, and in the gunpowder plot. And so there was a lot of questions around usurpers, and the term equivocation, you know, became very popular, and which has to do with treachery and that kind of thing. And so if you know some of the historical background in which Shakespeare was writing, then you'll be able to appreciate the plays more. If you know, for example, about the gunpowder plot, about to overthrow, you know, the government of King James, about the fact that there's a big difference between the Jacobean time period and the Elizabethan time period, about the fact that Shakespeare's plays became far more darker under the Jacobean rule, because in the Elizabethan time period there was a great sense of optimism and all of that, but there wasn't as great of a sense of optimism under King James, because they didn't trust him as much. And so it's helpful to be aware of some of the historical backgrounds. And again, another thing, back to the language thing that I almost forgot to say, is that you know, for example, one of the critiques that people will often launch against Shakespeare is the idea that the characters don't speak naturally. But the trouble is, though, is that Shakespeare was experimenting with form. So, for example, you wouldn't say, for example, in a musical, characters sing. Well, obviously that's not natural, but it's an experiment in form. Where Shakespeare would often experiment with metaphor and verse, and so in Elizabethan plays, audiences expected writers to experiment with poetic verse and metaphor and form. It was considered an extension of their writing abilities and their skill, which that's something that we typically don't see in modern dramas. So those are just some of the things you should be aware of while reading Shakespeare. I could list more, but today I just want you to think about those things, and maybe I'll make a follow-up video where I'll talk about other things that you should keep in mind while reading Shakespeare.